Um, Welcome to today's American Community Media Weekly National Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, your moderator for today and co-producer of our weekly Friday briefings with my colleague Sunita Sorachi. Today, our topic will reveal the ranking of the top 100 cities for urban parks. Urban parks aren't just great spots for jogging, playing, or lounging in the sun, though we love them for that. A new national poll reveals something even deeper. Parks are also powerful places of connection. In a time when social divides are growing, parks are some of the few spaces where people from all walks of life still come together. More than half of Americans say they had a conversation in a park with someone they didn't know and who came from a different background. That simple act of connection is increasingly rare elsewhere. The data also shows that cities with strong park systems tend to have more volunteers, more civic groups, more local leaders stepping up to serve their communities. This briefing will take a closer look at which cities are excelling when it comes to their parks and which still have room to grow. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, interest in parks has skyrocketed, and many cities have responded by boosting their investments. But the momentum is at risk. Will uncertain funding and potential budget cuts on the horizon? What's next for our urban green spaces? Join us as we unpack the latest ParkScore rankings, dive into fresh poll results, and hear directly from leaders on the ground. We'll spotlight strategies that are working and the cities leading the charge to create more inclusive and impactful parks for everyone. Our distinguished speakers are Will Klein, Director of Parks Research at the Trust for Public Land, Guillermo Rodriguez, California State Director and VP of the Pacific Region at the Trust for Public Land, Justin Cutler, Commissioner of Parks and Recreation at the City of Atlanta, and Yvette Lopez-Ledesma, Greening America's Cities Fellow, Community Partners. We ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will go to Q&A immediately after each speaker presents, and we will send the video and expanded bios later this afternoon. So let's begin with Will Klein, who will talk about the ParkScore report nationally and expand on the results of their interesting and groundbreaking poll on parks. Welcome, Will.
Thank you. Is the screen working?
Yes, it works fine. I can see it perfectly.
Great. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Will Klein. I lead Parks Research at Trust for Public Land, including publishing our annual ParkScore Index. Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit that works to connect everyone to the benefits and joys of the outdoors. As a leader in equitable access to the outdoors, TPL works with communities to create parks and protect public land where they are needed the most.
Will, just remember to go slowly, okay? You're going a little too fast.
The ParkScore Index is an annual ranking of park systems in the 100 most populous US cities. And we first published the index 14 years ago in 2012 to solve this problem. Too many Americans don't live within walking distance of a nearby park or green space. The index ranks city park systems. We don't rank city park and rec agencies, we rank the overarching systems from the perspective of the residents. That includes all publicly accessible parks managed by public and private entities alike. Cities are ranked on 5 categories key to an excellent park system: acreage, access, investment, amenities, and equity. And each category is scored on a relative basis. So 2 ways to think about this: we're in park and recreation, so we like a little friendly competition on the recreation side of the equation. And also you can think back to your high school days in math class when you're scored on a bell curve. Specifically, the 5 categories break down as follows. The acreage and access category on the left speak to the value of large regional parks and also the ability having close to home parks. So we often talk about that as the percentage of a city that has a park within a 10-minute walk of home. We also look at amenities investment, which speak to the quality of the park system. Is there enough money to maintain high quality parks? Are there a wide range of activities for people to do across their park system? And then we added a fifth category recently, equity, looking at the distribution of parks across the city by race and by income. Is it fair and who has access to nearby parks and green space? This year and then drum roll, almost forgot the punchline. Here's our top 10 park systems for 2025. Washington, DC is the nation's best big city park system for the fifth year in a row. For those of you familiar with DC, you may ask, they have all the National Park Service lands that were designed when the city was developed hundreds of years ago, speaking to the importance of prioritizing parks in city planning on a long-term basis. This year, Washington narrowly outscored Irvine, California, which rose to second, Minneapolis in third, and Cincinnati in fourth. And Denver notably cracked the top 10 for the first time. Alongside these rankings, we also like to speak to why parks are important. And so we released a special report, Parks, the Great Unifiers, that documented two overarching trends we're seeing across the country right now. For the first time, we conducted national polling data to understand how Americans connect with each other in outdoor public spaces. The results were pretty striking. Residents, regardless of political affiliation or any other way of difference throughout the United States, value public parks and use them frequently, suggesting that parks are among the least polarized spaces in this country right now. For example, we can look to Panorama Park in Colorado Springs, where Trust for Public Land worked with community members in one of the hottest neighborhoods in the city to renovate a park that had previously just been weeds, broken glass, and fire ant hills, in the words of Andre Dunn, a resident there. Following 4 years of collaboration with local partners, Panorama Park reopened in 2022 with, instead of weeds and broken glass and fire ant hills, with joy, hundreds of new trees, shrubs, sport fields, fitness stations, sounds of laughter, and even bathrooms. Our polling revealed that this story is happening all across the country. About 4 in 5 respondents, regardless of political affiliation, reported that they, like Andre Dunn, have a park where they feel comfortable and want to visit on a regular basis. They also reported in our survey that number one place people wanted to spend more time last year was outside. And all of these trends are regardless of political affiliation and any other kind of demographic split we saw. The implication of all this is that parks are a great place to bring together people of different backgrounds. So we can look to an example from Chicago, Illinois, where Douglas Park illustrates this well. In 2020 and kind of the recent years, the predominantly Black residents of North Lawndale and the predominantly Latino residents of South Lawndale found themselves at odds. Civic leaders were eager to bridge the divide through an initiative called One Lawndale. You might notice on this picture that North and South Lawndale are bisected by historic Route 66, but Douglas Park patches them together. Community leaders today hold peace parties, with one held in July in the north section of the park and the other following in August on the south side, each event drawing together people from both boundaries. Why do parks help break down barriers? Our polling continues to kind of offer some clues. For one, as we saw earlier, people of all backgrounds love parks, making them natural venues for mixing. And two, as Pilar mentioned at the start, people are more willing to have a conversation with somebody they didn't know before in a park. 2/3 of US residents said they met someone new in their local park in this past year. And half of the residents said that they not only had that conversation with somebody new, but that it was somebody who they thought was of a different social economic background. Parks are a great mixing place. And then parks also are ideal venues for civic leaders to grow. And take Carrie Salvery of the Vine City neighborhood in Atlanta as an example. Their catastrophic flood wiped out much of her neighborhood several years ago. Trust for Public Land worked with the community on the new park that rose from the devastation, became not just a beloved green space, but a vital piece of green infrastructure. In the years leading up to the opening, Carrie participated in public design workshops and mapping exercises. She showed up, she spoke up, she participated. Today, she chairs the 14-member board of the Alliance for Cook Park, a nonprofit organization that includes residents from the community as well as city heavyweights like the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau, JP Morgan Chase, and a restaurant consortium. I think Commissioner Cutler probably agreed that when she asks and speaks up for what they need, she tends to get it. And we see this in the data across the country. Over the last couple of years, our research has shown that these stories are not just one-offs. Cities that have better park systems have more social connections between people of different income groups, they have more volunteers, and there's more civic leaders and civic organizations, like the ones Alliance for Cook Park in Atlanta, the Open Center for the Arts in South Lawndale, and North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council. In part two of our report, we speak to that these are not just nice to have, but city leaders over the last 5 years since the pandemic have stepped up to invest in parks as spaces where communities can come together. In Fort Worth, Texas, the mayor, Maddie Parker, launched an initiative to address some troubling trends. Well below average park investment, too many people in Fort Worth without walkable access to a green space, and things were getting worse. The city is losing about 50 acres of natural open space to development each week. The Good Natured Green Space Initiative, started 2 years ago, aims to counter this through public and private partnership and grow and enhance the city's park system by preserving at least 10,000 acres of open space over 5 years. Fort Worth's increased investments have seen its ParkScore rank grow about 20 spots this year, from 90th to about 70th. We see examples of this across the country. Overall investments in city parks this year reached a record high, even after accounting for inflation. I think notably in this, part of this, yes, was from federal grant programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, but those just comprise about 5% of the overall mix. Local parks are driven by local leaders, local advocates, and volunteers. Volunteers and nonprofits, highlighted here in blue, comprise about twice as much of local park investment as the federal grants. Parks are really driven by people. And finally, we saw park access. One of the reasons we started the ParkScore Index to begin with reached record highs this year. Up to 76% of residents across the 100 biggest cities in this country now have a walkable access to a park, up from 68% when we started in 2012. That's millions of people who now have a park within walking distance that didn't 10, 15 years ago. And the biggest reason why this has happened are open communities coming together to decide to open schoolyards for public use after hours and on weekends. 75 of the 100 biggest cities now do this, including Atlanta, who Commissioner Cutler will probably speak to in just a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. There are questions in the chat for you. Well, this is a question about California. Okay, so Sunita, ask your question. I think this is general also.
Sure. Thanks, Pilar. Many California towns now have enacted strict ordinances around park usage. No camping, for example, no sleeping. And I remember back in the day, parks used to be a great space for Girl Scout overnighters, but that's no longer the case for many communities. So how do we keep parks welcoming spaces for all without demonizing vulnerable people?
So great question. That's not not a short answer. I think one of the things we can think about is in the COVID pandemic, one of the things that really emerged where parks were one of those spaces where cities turned to deliver social services, meals, health services to the most vulnerable among us. And so I think holding on to that value and importance, I think is a good reminder, even as kind of challenges of homelessness and people living in the parks make it kind of difficult to balance tensions, and find partnerships with your social service organizations is something we've seen more and more of and are necessary. Parks are a great mixing place, not just for people using the park, but for people managing and supporting them. And so I think that's a good strategy we've seen.
Will, what were the cities at the bottom or lower half of the ranking?
The city, so we'll hear from Guillermo where Los Angeles ranks 90th. And then there's a handful of other cities that have just historically, parks have not been prioritized in the history of their development. And so I think it's important to emphasize these rankings are not an assessment of the current city's leadership, but reflect the history and development of park systems in each city over time. And these are the cities that we try to spend most of our time supporting to figure out how to change the story for the next 100 years.
Henrietta Burrows, you had a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had a little difficulty unmuting.
Right.
Will, you showed a slide that showed 86% of the voters, Trump voters, and 83% of the Harris voters voted for parks. Is that the interpretation? And I'm just wondering if that is in fact the case, was it correlated in any way to Trump supporters being supporters of environmental concerns? What relationship would one draw, or what conclusions could one draw from that slide?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did not have a lot of detail on that slide. I can link the report, which has the fuller detail in the chat. That question and was specifically about of asking residents, do you have a park that you feel comfortable visiting on a regular basis? And regardless of who you voted for in the presidential election, 4 and 5 of respondents said that they did. We also did ask separate questions around willingness to support ballot measures and things like that. And we saw a little bit more of a split politically when you start asking more political questions, but still in general, a majority of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, support public lands at all levels.
I have a quick question. Well, I mean, maybe it's not a quick question, but it's a question regarding what you mentioned that DC has been at the top because of planning that was done when the city was developed. Why didn't this happen in other cities? Is there a quick answer to that?
It's a great, it's like $1 million question too. I don't know the answer, but I mean, I think as we hear about LA, you can think about LA and the promise of the automobile and private backyards, resulting in different priorities at the time. And I think the other thing is parks are a long-term asset. And so when you're making short-term decisions about development in any given development, it's easy to kind of forget about the long-term public assets as part of that decision. And so I think that's where it takes real city leaders and visionaries to enforce the importance of these long-term public assets that benefit everybody.
Okay, thank you. Will stay around, please. We're going to move on to Justin Cutler, who's the Commissioner for Parks and Recreation for the City of Atlanta, and who will talk about the strategies being used there. Atlanta has radically improved its ranking in this report. How did you guys do it?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm saying afternoon because I am on the East Coast here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a beautiful day, but yeah, the City of Atlanta, with many of our partners, came together to form a coalition called the Atlanta Schoolyards Project. These members included the Atlanta Public Schools, Trust for Public Lands, Children and Nature Network, as well as Kaboom. And these partners are really critical to our success in advancing our joint use agreement and our ParkScore. Trust for Public Land and also the Urban Land Institute here in Atlanta have been doing this work for many years. And the city recently came on board in partnership with our Department of Watershed Management, looking at stormwater management on school grounds and how could we leverage these spaces in order to both improve water quality, improve access to nature, and also improve playground space. And so back in 2023, we attended a convening in San Francisco, California, thanks to the Children and Nature Network and Kaboom for helping us come together. And we visited many different community schoolyards in San Francisco. We heard from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they'd shared their joint use agreement, which was a great document, simplistic in nature, but specific also to help us move forward. So we took that framework back to Atlanta. We continued conversations and we negotiated an agreement over the last year and a half and recently adopted that agreement. Before that, that may not have been possible. The school district and the city had kind of a colder relationship under our new mayor, Andre Dickens, his leadership, and under the leadership of Dr. Brian Johnson and the school board. We've really been able to continue to flourish and to develop a strong partnership. So through the adoption of the joint use agreement, now all of the schools, playgrounds, fields are open for our neighbors after hours. And the schools now have access to our pools, our playgrounds. They have access to our swimming pools indoors and our golf courses and our tennis centers for their students. So this saves the school district over $500,000 in potential use fees, and therefore saves us taxpayers and our neighbors that resource that we can spend now on education and after school activities. And really, by adopting this joint use agreement, we were able to improve our access, our 10-minute walk score from 79% in 2024 to just over 82% in 2025. So that's a 3% increase. Now, that may not seem like a significant jump, but what that did is it also allowed us to add the assets of the play fields, the basketball courts, the playgrounds. And that is real, those two combined to really increase our park score by 4 points from 25 to 21. And just back in 2016, we're at 51. And so we really worked hard to increase access, to increase opportunity, to increase amenities. Also investments. Through the Mayor's Green Space Advisory Council, we were able to work with our city council to increase the park millage, which has resulted in additional funding, which has unlocked additional grant funding, because now people believe that we have the resources to maintain our parks at a higher level. So that has also allowed us to gain more nonprofit dollars. In addition to that, we've also been working on our greenways. And if anybody has been to Atlanta or has been tangential to Atlanta, you likely heard about the Beltline. We call this Atlanta's beachfront property. We have a beautiful river, but ironically, Atlanta developed around the rail yards when we were developing in 1847. We were originally called Terminus here in Atlanta. And there was the rail yards just a stone's throw from my office here in downtown Atlanta, where we really grew as a community. And so we looked at Ryan Gravel, TPL, and many others looked at these rail yards as a possible solution to really create some economic vibrancy and development opportunities. So the Beltline will now be 85% complete by the summer of 26, right before the World Cup. So you'll have a beautiful J that you'll be able to bike around if you choose to come to Atlanta for the semifinal World Cup or any of the great World Cup games. This has really allowed us to create a beautiful linear green space. We work with our partners called Trees Atlanta, who plants trees in our community, and they have created a linear arboretum. We also are the Atlanta Beltline Partnership is the nonprofit agency that supports the Beltline, and they're focused on anti-displacement strategies. So they have property tax abatement programs, they have job training and job development. There's a level of affordable housing commitment that the Beltline Development Authority is focused on. So they're responsible for building several thousand homes, and they've actually exceeded that number every year. So we're also thinking not just of how do we build a great riverfront, but how do we make sure everyone has access to that riverfront. We're also developing transit along this corridor. We're looking at both fixed rail transit along the southern corridor. So it'd be light rail or kind of Grass Creek light rail, as well as pod type transit along the eastern side of our Beltline. And also considering adding an additional multi-use trail along the east side Beltline to make sure there's the speedy wheels and then there's the leisure walkers. Because when you have a good thing, everybody wants to be on it. And sometimes we have dog walkers with those really long leashes that can cause problems. Also, we've really transformed our public spaces. Will talked a little bit about Cook Park. And Cook Park is one of those special places in Vine City where we're really able to take tragedy and turn it into opportunity. There was a recent flood after major development that led to kind of paving over pervious surface, which then exacerbated the stormwater issues in this community. And then Trust for Public Land and the City of Atlanta and the Department of Watershed worked collaboratively to develop a co-developed park. And so now we have half the park is a beautiful stormwater facility, and the other half of the park is a beautiful park. And during Hurricane Helene, the stormwater facility and the park was able to absorb this extra water that traditionally had flooded the neighborhood, causing catastrophe. And so the park was able to swell up, the stormwater swelled up, it inundated the sports field, which is what it was supposed to do. And then 3 days later, the park looked like there had never been a rainstorm. And I think that's the amazing part of partnerships that we have here in Atlanta, and our mayor calls the group project, is when you combine both stormwater, parks and recreation, community advocacy, you're really able to get a special project. And so those are some of the ways that we've been able to think of parks in a multifaceted approach.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've been working hard to get things done.
Wow, yes.
To learn more about some of this information, some of our data, you can go online to our equity data tool. It's modeled off of the ParkScore map, but we take it a step further and we look specifically at our census tracts. You can look at the quality of the park, and we use that to help inform how we approach parkland development in Atlanta. And you can go to activate-atl.com to find more information about our equity data tool. And yeah. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Justin. If you can put that resource in the chat when you have a chance, maybe after we finish talking. I was just going to ask you, when you said that there was a coalition that helped open the schools to the community, was there any resistance? Because I can imagine this happening, I don't know, in LA, a city that I lived in for many, many years. And I can imagine hearing some voices say, no, this might not be a good idea.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern that that the community has, and oftentimes it's the principal that has the concern until you just meet with the principal and you're able to kind of talk through the different issues, is, you know, what is going to happen during the day in which my kids are on this playground, and then what happens if something occurs at night where vandalism occurs, or in Atlanta recently we've had 2 playgrounds set on fire. What if that happens at a schoolyard and now the kids aren't able to participate? You know, those are concerns that would happen regardless of whether they're open or closed. You know, vandals will jump fences to cause harm. And so our thought is that by creating more activity and creating more positive space where after school you have more eyes on the park, you're actually improving safety. You're bringing more awareness to what's happening at the space. You're creating more identity and more social cohesion, that people don't want to vandalize the space because they have a sense of ownership. And so, you know, to overcome that, you know, it really just takes meeting with people on an individual basis, hearing their concerns, working with them to overcome them, and then showing spaces where it has worked. So that's why, you know, the convening that Children in Nature Network and Kaboom and others have helped facilitate really does start to break down that barrier around the art of possibility. And so, you know, if you're in a community where you're struggling to get people motivated to pursue this opportunity, come visit Atlanta. You know, go to San Francisco. There's numerous communities in California that have solved this problem and cracked that nut. And so it's going to take some creative thinking, and then I think it's going to take some leadership to get that done. And I think we got 2 great leaders here on the call from LA that want to get this done too. So.
Thank you, Justin. There are more questions in the chat, but we're going to leave them there because I know these will be great questions for the whole panel. Yep. And so we're going to move on to the next speaker, and that is Guillermo Rodriguez, who will share specifically regarding LA and how it has room to grow when it comes to parks. Guillermo, please go ahead, and thank you for being with us.
Gracias, Pilar. Guillermo Rodriguez with the Trust for Public Land. Thank you very much to all of the reporters from across the country who are covering this important topic. When I think about parks and open space, I really do think that our park systems across the country is where our communities really come together and celebrate life. We certainly saw in COVID that for many communities, your front yard, your backyard is your local park. And unfortunately, in this country, over 100 million people do not have a close to home park, and 28 million of them are children. And so the work that Justin is doing, that his colleagues across the country to make our park systems better, is what we at the Trust for Public Land celebrate, want to support, and engage. I'm calling in from San Francisco, where I live. I'm very fortunate to live in one of 2 cities in the United States that provide 100% of all residents a 10-minute walk to a quality park or open space, and that's San Francisco and Boston. But I'm here to talk a little bit more about the rankings for the city of Los Angeles. As a question was asked, where does Los Angeles stand in the rankings? And it's unfortunate that Los Angeles, the largest city in California, is ranked 90th in the Trust for Public Land's, annual park system. and again, 90th. And I think it's important to understand for the city of Los Angeles that just 5 years ago, they were 49th. And so year after year, Los Angeles has dropped in the ranking system. So what does that mean? There are about 1.5 million Angelenos who do not have a close to home park. So access is very critical. It is an issue that is plaguing the city of Los Angeles. The other important factor is in Los Angeles is really long-term planning. Los Angeles has had, multiple challenges, and our park systems in Los Angeles have not gained the level of attention that they need in order to keep up with the important innovations that are happening across the country. So, for example, the last time the city of Los Angeles updated its park master plan was in 1973. Tom Bradley was mayor in 1973. And that was the last time the city of Los Angeles updated its parks master plan. Looking at the data at the top 100 cities across the country, master plans, updating capital plans is, a 5 to 10 year undertaking that cities across the country do in order to look at its assets and engagement. The other challenge that Los Angeles has had, which has contributed to the numbers decreasing in the ParkScore system, is its financial support of its parks system. Again, 5 years ago, the city of Los Angeles was above the national average, and today it's significantly below. And so when you think about, what does that mean? Again, cities across the country have increased their funding, both public and private, for parks and open space. And in Los Angeles, that number has been static. It's not really increased. And so if for folks who live in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, I give great credit to the amazing staff at Los Angeles Recreation and Parks Department for running, a significant, large, and complex system and doing a monumental job with very little resources to continue to provide high quality, amazing public service to Angelenos across the city. The other challenge that Los Angeles has is when it comes down to looking at the equity factor. The vast majority of the natural resources and natural areas that Los Angeles has are highly concentrated, in the more affluent neighborhoods of Los Angeles. The distribution of natural areas and parks is not equal. And that's been another challenge for the city of Los Angeles. So that's the downside or the negative news. Los Angeles is at 90. But, we at the Trust for Public Land, don't believe that's the end of the story. What excites me is that thanks to some absolutely amazing community leaders, thanks to frontline organizations who have been doing incredible organizing work, they have been calling on the city of Los Angeles to make important investments in park equity, have really been the individuals and leaders and grassroots organizations who have championed the idea of reclaiming land for public purposes, thinking about the Los Angeles River, as an important opportunity to do what like Atlanta is done with the Beltway, and how do we open up the LA River as a place for public enjoyment and recreation. And so I think the good side of all of this is thanks to, significant community organizing and engaging. The city of Los Angeles last year funded what is, I think, an amazing park needs assessment, which is the basis by which you develop, strong policy, you create important master plans around your park system. And that effort, the park needs assessment, got underway at the beginning of this year, pulled together some, amazing consultants from throughout LA with great expertise to be able to, begin to unpack where Los Angeles is. And so I think it's excellent that the city recognized that and is gathering important data and talking to community about what Los Angeles wants and needs in a park system. I think the other good thing that's operating in Los Angeles and what it has as an advantage are there many other partners who run park systems in the city of Los Angeles. You have regional entities, you have the county parks, you have state parks, and you have federal land. And so I think the future for Los Angeles is how to work more collaboratively with other government agencies who own and operate public open space in the city of Los Angeles and how we get there. I think two other secrets that if Los Angeles would adopt, they would really significantly improve their rankings. And I really appreciated Justin's example of what the city of Atlanta did to move from the middle of the pack to, now at 21 in ParkScore ranking. Congratulations to the city of Atlanta and your leadership. But I think Los Angeles also has tremendous opportunity with its public schoolyards. If we can, begin to develop, joint use agreements, unlock the gates of our public school systems and work in cooperation with the Recreation and Parks Department in Los Angeles, we can really move the needle on access. And I think all that needs to do is really the city council and the Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school district in the country, is to come together and build an agreement, a joint use agreement. The second thing that I think Los Angeles desperately needs is a dedicated funding stream to support parks and open space. If you look at places like Seattle, in the top 10, a few years ago, they also were not, moving in a great direction, but the community there gathered together with the city leadership and passed a local tax measure in order to create dedicated funding for parks and open space. And I think Los Angeles is capable of doing that. Just this last year in the November elections, statewide, we passed Proposition 4 in California, which included funding for local parks and open space. Clearly, voters in California support parks and open space. The data supports that. I think Angelenos would support a local ballot initiative if they saw that it was actually going to help, rehabilitate our existing park system in LA, address the access issue, expand equity. And so, yes, LA is at 90, but I think that there's a road to get them to be much more competitive in the future. There are real opportunities, real engagement, good best practices across the country. And so happy to answer questions and continue to participate with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. What I'm going to do is there's a bunch of good questions, but I'm going to bring in the last speaker and then we'll just go to questions because I know she has more to say about LA and about all of this. So Yvette Lopez-Ledesma, Greening America's Cities Fellow and of Community Partners, welcome.
Thank you, Pilar, and thank you, everyone. And glad to be here and happy to continue always the conversation about this really important issue. And I'm glad you all are up for hearing more about it from folks like us that are here speaking. I'll get through a couple of things, but I'm going to try and talk slowly for the interpreters, but also leave room for questions because I know time is looking a little tight. So I am Yvette Lopez-Ledesma, and I work with Community Partners, which is an intermediate organization and also fiscal sponsor to a lot of groups here in Los Angeles. And one of the groups that we work with at a more national scale, or sort of a national group that we work with, is the Bezos Earth Fund. And my role with Community Partners, I work to ensure that their grantees, that they can gain access to resources and networks to facilitate their work to increase urban greening projects here in Los Angeles through the Greening America Cities program. The Greening America Cities program at the Earth Fund is focused on ensuring that people in dense urban cities can have the opportunity to connect with a green space. That's in its most sort of simplistic form there. And I'll share a link in the chat for all of you to learn about the program. But another hat that I wear here in LA is that I am a member of the City of LA's Park Needs Assessment Steering Committee, along with Guillermo and a couple of others. And Guillermo was starting to sort of talk about the Park Needs Assessment. So for purposes of this conversation, I'll focus on that process. The Park Needs Assessment, just for some clarity, is a process to determine the city needs related to parks, park infrastructure, and it's going to be, what comes out of the assessment is going to be useful in informing decision making around top priorities that are important to the community. So it's a very public process. I'll encourage everyone to participate, or anyone who is a user of City of LA parks, and wants to participate can. It's all of the tools and resources are available in multiple languages as well. So hopefully some of your readers in the area are encouraged to participate. But the Park Needs Assessment will incorporate community feedback and considers the data about park amenities, park locations, and a number of parks while balancing future population projections and budgets towards overall park improvements. You'll learn a lot about the park system when you visit the Park Needs Assessment website. There's over 500, I think 500 parks that the City of LA Rec and Parks Department operates and manages. There's a lot of really good, useful information in there. But this Park Needs Assessment will take place during this year of 2025. And the assessment will be ready by early fall, as projected, and then there'll be a sort of a document that gets finalized by the end of 2025. The steering committee members include representatives of organizations that partner with Rec and Parks in the City of LA on citywide parks and land initiatives, as well as park advocates that are dedicated to park access, park equity, recreation, and land stewardship. And those committee members were invited by the Department of Rec and Parks. So the purpose of this process, to identify current and future needs, the challenges, opportunities for improvement across the city's parks and recreational facilities. But it's also this guide, right? Like how are we making decisions? There's a lot of budget conversation happening at the City of LA right now. And where's the guide? And so this will be that guide that can help make decisions about investment, and that will be reflective of the diverse cultures and communities of the City of LA. And so that's really important, as these are all public processes, public dollars that we're talking about. And so we really encourage the public to come out and share what they have to say about our parks. Again, I'll drop a link to the Park Needs Assessment site where you can get all the resources and information on how to access and be a part of the process. There's the series of public meetings that's also kicking off this coming week. And so you can find information, the dates, the locations, the times, and even, show up ready by reading the materials that are on the website, show up ready to engage, or just, show up just kind of as is and sharing your thoughts about the parks, because everyone's voice is so instrumental to this. And like we said, this should be reflective of the people that use the parks and need them. And so just kind of on the note of need and the news that we also received this week around the score of LA, we've been talking about ParkScore. It's clear we need more investment in prioritization of parks with our public dollars and private philanthropic dollars as well. It takes a lot of work to do this work around parks and ensuring that we have them for not just for now, but into the future, and that they're well maintained. And so it's really, hopefully, a call to action almost for folks to come together and really be vocal about the need for parks. I think at all levels of government right now, there's a lot of voices being lifted up and lifting, raising their voice around parks, public lands, open space, and decisions that are happening in current time. And so, it's no different here at a local level. We know that parks are an important issue. We want them funded. We want them maintained. And we want more of them because ultimately that's what, the data also tells us. I know there's the data, and then there's also, of course, what we know from our lived experiences and just living here in Los Angeles. Like, so many folks don't live within that 10-minute walk of a park space. And, what's going to make the biggest impact is having a park in the communities where people are. And then also encouraging them and ensuring that they have access to spaces that are a little further out, regional parks, state parks, and bigger lands, national parks, etc. But parks are also, I think, the way that what one thing that we also need is just the framing around parks and when decision makers are making decisions about parks for them to really center that a park is not just a park. We have seen over and over again that it's not just for recreation, but they're really lifelines in communities. If you have a park in your neighborhood, you may have access to food that you didn't have access to because the local food bank is partnering with a group and they're doing some sort of food distribution event at a park. There may be childcare services that are created or provided at a park. When the fires happened, there was a lot of distribution of goods, and FEMA and other folks were setting up at parks and rec centers and whatnot. So parks, an investment in parks in the building and the staffing and the operating and the maintenance of these parks and open spaces. I mean, it's really a lifeline and provides a huge return on those investments, both in qualitative and quantitative ways. And so, we're all here because we know that, we live that, but it's really important to get that message out. A park can really be a lifeline in communities, and especially in communities of, Black and brown folks, under-resourced communities. Sometimes the resources don't make it into all of communities. And so if a park is there, the likelihood of certain things, certain programs existing, certain folks being connected to those resources, to other public resources, is probably greater. And so a couple of years ago, even an organization by the name of the Prevention Institute did some research around lifespan and park space in communities. And, it's 10 years, I believe, is what the difference is between a place like Beverly Hills and a community, let's say in like South LA or Hyde Park community. That's huge. And so, I could talk about parks all day, and I'm sure we all can. But, ultimately, that's what this is about. It's about quality of life. It's about ensuring that folks have access to the resources that they're also paying for and have invested in through tax dollars and whatnot. And so, yeah, I'll drop all of my contact information and all the links that I mentioned in a second. But hopefully this leaves enough time for some questions.
Yeah. Yes, we still have 10 minutes. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you so much to every one of you. And I guess the question that is in the backs of all of our minds, it's one that Henrietta put in the chat. We're hearing that there's a lot of cuts coming down from the federal government. There's a lot of cuts to things that are good for our communities. Will this affect all these plans? Will this affect all these the park situation in across the country? And any one of you, please raise your hand.
I'll just say yes and no. It'll impact parks in terms of what we're seeing in Atlanta is it'll likely impact some of our trail projects as the Department of Transportation and some of the raised grants are being, there's questions or concerns about whether those will continue. Also related to the urban forestry grants under the sustainability program. It's still to be determined. We're submitting an invoice as a test case to see if they actually pay the invoice. But that is our next step. For all intents and purposes, we understand we still have that grant. But then the no is there's also an upside potential with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is funded by oil and gas royalties. So if the intention is to drill more oil and gas, then there will be more Land and Water Conservation Fund resources. And also the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Program may see a benefit. That's assuming that they're still granting resources through those programs. And so I think that's to be determined at this point too. So it could be a good, bad situation. But I think also it's an opportunity for cities to rally partners together. You know, Yvette spoke a lot about partnerships, and going through a planning process right now is actually probably the best time to be doing this planning, because you're going to have potentially the least amount of resources. And from that resource scarcity, you're really able to find what are the things that we can do together to make that stone soup. And prior to 2020, the Trust for Public Land did a study and found that 1 in every $5 spent on parks and recreation services came from a local nonprofit. And so fortunately, we have a very, very robust nonprofit community here in Atlanta, and that has helped to sustain our park system up to this point. And now going forward, we're making a greater investment on the government side. But I think partnerships are critical to getting the work done. And that's what's going to sustain us through this period of time, which will actually create more social cohesion and more support for parks going forward.
Thank you, Justin. Anyone else wants to dip their toes on that question? Well,
I would just add that what we're hearing is a lot of cities are facing budget challenges this year, which are indirectly and directly related to the broader economic and federal interests. And historically, parks tend to be the first to get cut. It took us nationally 17 years for parks to recover from the 2007-2008 Great Recession. And so I think there will be some difficult decisions happening across the country on city budgets, and thinking about how parks are this place that can address many of these needs is important to think about in terms of partnerships.
Anyone else? Okay, everything's been said. All right, so we're talking about LA. How central is LA River's revival to the future of LA parks? There was a lot of momentum about reimagining the river. Where is that effort now? Maybe Guillermo can address that.
Thank you, Pilar, and certainly invite Yvette to jump in as well. And I know we have another expert with UCLA, Professor John Christensen, on here as well, who has been very active. The exciting part of the Los Angeles River is if you think about its totality, you know, starting in the Angeles National Forest and ending, you know, in the Pacific, and running through so many different cities. So LA County has its Los Angeles River Master Plan that they are activating and engaging, and community groups have been quite active and engaged. A lot of great examples of how the LA River can really be more than just about parks and open space, but that could be used as, you know, major public transit infrastructure. So the whole development of the bike lanes along the river, really funded primarily through Metro and engaging in that aspect. And then, you know, many other organizations really working to build linkages and connections to the river. And so not only from, you think about, you know, LA State Historic Park and other, you know, entities and engagement, but the city of Los Angeles itself is actively, you know, engaging and thinking about what development along the river means. But I think the important aspect that frontline communities have been pushing is really to make sure that any development along the LA River addresses the issue of gentrification, addresses the issue of access, addresses the issue of economic, prosperity for the communities who live there today. I think it's a valuable example of how we need to think about public open space differently and use the assets that Los Angeles has to its advantage to create, the type of recreation that residents are calling for.
I'm so sorry, I was muted. All right. I was asking Yvette or even John Christensen if they want to chime in.
I'll just say, and what, I'll echo what Guillermo said, because there's also an organization, one of our other Greening America Cities grantees, the Southeast Asian Community Alliance, is very engaged in conversations and just plans for how communities can stay in place as this development happens. And so I just encourage you to also look into the Southeast Asian Community Alliance. For those of you that were in Sacramento, I guess in the later part of 2025 for the convening that was there for ethnic media, Sissy Trin, who's the executive director, spoke on that panel too about some of that work.
So we have essentially 3 minutes left, and we wonder how can our media, all of us that are here, many of us represent communities that are directly affected by the lack of parks. How can we support? How can we help with this effort, especially with the schools, pushing to open schools? Any advice?
I think it's very powerful when ethnic media picks up the phone or sends an email to Los Angeles Unified School District, PR department, for example, and asks the question, what is the district doing to create joint use? To ask the same of the city. I think the media plays an important role for the community by simply asking important questions and holding, elected officials and our public agencies accountable to your audiences, which, when I think of LA Unified and how diverse their students are, many on this call, you all represent the media outlets that those communities are looking to for vital information. I think that's a very powerful thing for the media to reach out and ask the district what it's doing, ask the city what it's doing to help encourage a conversation in Los Angeles, for example.
Justin, our media in Atlanta covering this issue?
Yeah, one group specifically, the Soprano Report, does a great job and provides a platform for local leaders to speak on parks and recreation, green space issues, also Rough Draft, as well as the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, more of a traditional media source, as well as Urbanize and a couple of social media reporters have covered this effort extensively. I think, as Guillermo said, asking the questions, I think, is paramount. I think from a systematic standpoint, though, working with school districts to engage principals to identify their concerns. One of the biggest challenges is how we manage schools. In Atlanta, the principals often have a disproportionate amount of power related to the policies or the principles as in PRINCLEPE, right, versus a principal as in the manager, related to how schools are used. And I think that's also a barrier, or can be a barrier, where you have one principal at one school that sees community as an asset, and then you have another principal at another community who sees neighbors as a threat. And it's that distinction that creates barriers and challenges for neighbors to gain access to those facilities. And so if we're going to have this decentralized power model in how we manage schools, that can lead to these issues where the administration and the superintendent, they have a policy, but implementation is very slow and fragmented.
And we've run out of time, guys. So thank you all for being with us. Thank you all for all the experts and for the media that attended. And hopefully they're going to write in stories and call the superintendent of schools in LA and talk about everything that we've talked about today. Thank you so much and have a happy weekend.